was a quiet evening, the kind where the world seemed to slow down just enough for people to catch their breath. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple before fading into a deep blue. Cars moved steadily along the suburban road, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Among them was Marcus Johnson, a man whose life was anything but ordinary, though he often wished it could be. Marcus was driving home after a long day at work. His job wasn't something most people understood, advising top government officials on policies that shaped the nation, but it demanded everything from him. He loved what he did, but sometimes, like tonight, all he wanted was to get back to his cozy house, sit in his favorite chair, and forget about the weight of responsibility for a little while. As he drove, his mind wandered. He thought about the meeting earlier that day, the endless emails and the phone call with Secretary Alvarez. But his thoughts were interrupted when he felt the car jerk slightly to one side. At first, he didn't think much of it, assuming it might just be uneven pavement. Then came another jolt, more pronounced this time. Marcus glanced at his rearview mirror and noticed the car pulling to the right, a flat tire. He sighed deeply, gripping the steering wheel tighter as he scanned the area for a safe place to pull over. Spotting a wide shoulder up ahead, he signaled and eased the vehicle off the road. Turning on his hazard lights, he stepped out of the car and surveyed the situation. Sure enough, the front passenger side tire was completely deflated. Marcus wasn't particularly thrilled about changing a tire in the dark, but he knew how to do it. He popped open the trunk and retrieved the spare tire, jack, and lug wrench, rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt. He hadn't bothered to change out of his work clothes yet. He knelt beside the car and got to work loosening the lug nuts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. The sound of an engine approaching caught his attention. Looking up briefly, he saw headlights slowing down behind him. A police cruiser pulled over, its red and blue lights flashing against the night sky. Marcus frowned slightly. He hadn't done anything wrong, so why was a cop stopping? Maybe they were just checking if he needed help. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Officer Ryan Dawson stepped out of the cruiser. He adjusted his belt and walked toward Marcus with deliberate steps. From the moment he approached, there was something off about his demeanor. His shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. Instead of asking if Marcus needed assistance, he barked, "What are you doing here?" Marcus paused mid-motion, the lug wrench still in his hand. He looked up at the officer, surprised by the tone. "I'm changing a tire," he replied calmly. "Had a flat." "Changing a tire?" Officer Dawson repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "This your car?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said politely, standing up to face the officer. "Here, I can show you the registration if you'd like." But Officer Dawson didn't seem interested in seeing any proof. His eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus, taking in his appearance, the neatly pressed shirt, the tie slightly loosened, around his neck the polished shoes. None of it mattered. All Officer Dawson saw was a black man kneeling beside a luxury sedan late at night. To him, that added up to trouble. "You sure this is your car?" he asked again, his tone sharper. "Now, looks pretty fancy for someone like you." Marcus stiffened at the implication. "Someone like you." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. He forced himself to remain calm, reminding himself that reacting emotionally wouldn't help the situation. "Yes, it's my car," he said, firmly. "Would you like to see the registration or not?" Officer Dawson ignored the question. Instead, he took a step closer, his hand resting casually on the grip of his holstered weapon. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Work," Marcus replied. "I'm heading home." "And where exactly is home?" the officer pressed. "About 20 minutes from here," Marcus said. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm trying to fix my tire so I can get going. If you're concerned, feel free to check the registration. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you let me finish." For a moment, Officer Dawson said nothing. He stared at Marcus, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he reached for his radio and called in the license plate number. Marcus watched silently, his frustration mounting. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He hadn't broken any laws, he wasn't causing harm. Yet here he was being treated like a suspect simply because of the color of his skin. A few minutes passed, and Officer Dawson received confirmation that the car was indeed registered to Marcus Johnson. But instead of backing off, he doubled down. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered. Marcus hesitated. "Why? I haven't done anything wrong." "I said step away," Officer Dawson snapped, raising his voice. Reluctantly, Marcus complied, stepping back from the car and holding up his hands to show he posed no threat. "I don't understand what's happening," he said. "You've already checked the registration. What's the problem?" "The problem," Officer Dawson shot back, "is that I don't trust you. Something about this whole thing doesn't add up." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Drivers passing by slowed down to watch the scene unfold. Some honked, their horns impatiently, eager to continue on their journeys. Others lingered longer, curious about the confrontation between the officer and the well-dressed man by the roadside. One of those passers-by was Emily Richards, a journalist who happened to be driving home from a late dinner with friends. She noticed the flashing lights and slowed her car to a crawl, peering out the window. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight. A black man in professional attire standing near a luxury car, clearly agitated, while a white police officer loomed over him with an accusatory stance. Something about the interaction struck Emily as odd. She grabbed her phone from the passenger seat and started recording. Quietly, she rolled down her window and zoomed in on the pair, capturing every word exchanged between them. Though she couldn't hear everything clearly, the tension was palpable, even from a distance. Back at the scene, Officer Dawson continued to press Marcus, demanding answers to questions that grew increasingly absurd. "Who do you work for?" he asked. "I'm a government advisor," Marcus replied, his patience wearing thin. "If you want, I can give you my supervisor's contact information." "A government advisor?" Officer Dawson scoffed, clearly unconvinced. "Yeah, right. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds?" "It's the truth," Marcus said evenly. "Whether you believe me or not is irrelevant. I've shown you the registration. You've run the plates. There's no reason to detain me." But Officer Dawson wasn't listening anymore. In his mind, Marcus was guilty until proven innocent, a mindset fueled by prejudice rather than facts. Without another word, he reached for his handcuffs. Marcus's heart sank as the cold metal clicked around his wrists. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. "You're making a huge mistake." "Oh, am I?" Officer Dawson sneered. "We'll see about that." And with that, Marcus was led to the patrol car, leaving his own vehicle and his dignity behind on the side of the road. The inside of the police cruiser was cold and cramped. Marcus sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him, staring out the window at the flashing lights reflecting off the asphalt. The scene outside felt surreal. His car abandoned on the shoulder, tools scattered near the flat tire, and a growing number of curious onlookers watching from their vehicles. He couldn't believe this was happening. All he had been doing was changing a tire, something anyone could have been doing, on that quiet road. Yet here he was, treated like a criminal. Officer Ryan Dawson climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut with unnecessary force. He glanced at Marcus in the rearview mirror, his expression smug. "You better start explaining yourself," he said, his tone harsh. "Because I don't buy your story for 1 second." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I already told you everything," he replied calmly. "I'm Marcus Johnson. I work as an advisor for the Secretary of State. My car broke down and I was fixing it, that's all there is to it." Dawson snorted. "Yeah, sure. A big-shot government official driving around in a fancy car. Do you think I was born yesterday?" Marcus clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to argue. He knew it wouldn't do any good. No matter how many facts he provided, Officer Dawson wasn't interested in listening. His mind was made up and nothing Marcus said would change that. Still, he tried one more time. "If you don't believe me, call my office. They'll confirm who I am." "Save it," Dawson snapped. "We'll see about that when we get to the station." With that, the officer started the engine and pulled onto the road, leaving behind the scene of the supposed crime. As they drove, Marcus stared out the window, his thoughts racing. How had things escalated so quickly? One moment he'd been focused on replacing a tire. The next he was being hauled off to a police station. It didn't make sense, but then again, racism rarely did. Meanwhile, Emily Richards sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. She had watched the entire exchange unfold, her phone still recording every detail. Her heart pounded as she replayed the events in her mind. Something about the way Officer Dawson had treated Marcus, it wasn't right. There was no justification for it. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet he was being arrested simply because of the color of his skin. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. She could leave, go home, and pretend she hadn't seen anything. But deep down she knew she couldn't ignore what had happened. As a journalist, she had a responsibility to shine a light on injustice. This might not be the kind of story she usually covered, but it was important, too important to let slide. She decided to follow the police cruiser, keeping a safe distance so as not to draw attention to herself. Her mind raced with questions. Who was Marcus Johnson? Was he really a government official? And if so, how far? Would this incident go before someone stepped in to stop it? At the police station, Marcus was led inside and placed in a holding cell. The room was small, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. He sat on the hard bench, his wrists still cuffed, feeling both angry and helpless. He had dealt with prejudice before, of course, subtle comments, suspicious glances, assumptions based on stereotypes, but never anything like this. Being handcuffed and locked up without cause was a new low, even for him. Time seemed to drag on endlessly. Marcus tried to focus on staying calm, reminding himself that this wouldn't last forever. Someone would figure out who he was eventually, and when they did, there would be consequences for Officer Dawson. But waiting was unbearable. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Outside the station, Emily parked her car and opened her laptop. She uploaded the video she had recorded earlier, trimming it slightly to highlight the most damning moments. Then she posted it online, adding a caption that read, "Racist cop arrests black man changing tire, unaware he's a government official." Within minutes, the post began to gain traction. People commented, shared, and expressed outrage. Some even tagged local news outlets, urging them to investigate further. Back inside the station, word of Marcus's arrest spread among the officers. Most dismissed it as routine, just another suspect brought in for questioning. But one rookie, cop, a young man named Alex Carter, overheard snippets of conversation and grew curious. He had only been on the job for a few months and hadn't developed the hardened cynicism of his colleagues. Something about the situation struck him as odd. When he heard another officer mention the name Secretary Alvarez during a heated discussion, Alex decided to look it up. Pulling out his phone, he typed the name into a search engine. What he found shocked him. According to several reputable sources, Marcus Johnson was indeed a high-ranking government official, known for his expertise in policymaking and his close ties to top political figures. Alex's stomach churned as he realized the gravity of the mistake. If what he read was true, and there was no reason to doubt it, then the department had just arrested someone incredibly influential. Worse, they had done so based on nothing more than racial bias. He knew he had to act quickly. He approached Captain Lewis, the commanding officer on duty, and explained what he had discovered. At first, Captain Lewis dismissed him, assuming it was just gossip or misinformation. But when Alex showed him the articles and photos confirming Marcus's identity, the captain's face turned pale. "We've got a serious problem," Captain Lewis muttered under his breath. He grabbed his radio and ordered an immediate meeting with the senior staff. Within minutes, the entire precinct was buzzing with panic. Captain Lewis hurried to the holding area, where Marcus sat quietly, still waiting for answers. When he saw the captain approaching, Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Captain Lewis unlocked the cell door and stepped inside, his expression apologetic. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice trembling slightly. I want to apologize. For what's happened here tonight, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." Marcus looked at him, his expression unreadable. A misunderstanding, he repeated, his tone icy. Is that what you're calling it? I assure you we're going to rectify this immediately. Captain Lewis continued, ignoring the sarcasm. Please allow me to remove those cuffs and escort you to a more comfortable area. We'll sort everything out. Reluctantly, Marcus nodded, allowing the captain to unlock the handcuffs. As the metal fell away, he rubbed his sore wrists, wincing slightly. Though he appreciated the gesture, he knew apologies weren't enough. This wasn't just about him. It was about the larger issue of systemic racism and unchecked power within law enforcement. While Marcus was being moved to a private room, Emily's video continued to spread across social media. By midnight, it had gone viral, sparking outrage across the country. Commenters demanded justice for Marcus, while others shared similar stories of discrimination they had experienced. Journalists began reaching out to local authorities for statements, and politicians weighed in, calling for accountability. By the time dawn broke, the small suburban police station was under siege, not physically, but figuratively. Phones rang, non-stop, reporters camped outside, and protests were being organized. For Marcus, the ordeal was far from over, but he knew one thing for certain: silence was no longer an option. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows of the police station, Marcus Johnson sat in a small meeting room, staring at the cup of coffee placed in front of him. He hadn't touched it. His mind was racing, replaying every moment of the previous night. The arrest, the humiliation, the disbelief that this could happen to someone in his position. Despite the apologies from Captain Lewis and the promises of making things right, Marcus felt no relief. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on him, not just as an individual, but as a symbol of something much larger. Outside, the world was waking up to the story. Emily Richards' video had ignited a firestorm. Social media platforms were flooded with reactions, anger, disbelief, and calls for justice. Protesters began gathering outside the police station, holding signs that read, "End racial profiling," and "Justice for Marcus Johnson." News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, broadcasting live updates to millions of viewers. What had started as a routine evening for Marcus had spiraled into a national conversation about race, power, and accountability. Inside the station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered nervously in corners, glancing at Marcus whenever they passed the room where he was waiting. Captain Lewis paced back and forth in his office, fielding calls from city officials, lawyers, and even members of Congress who demanded answers. The pressure was mounting, and everyone knew it. Officer Ryan Dawson, meanwhile, sat in another part of the building, visibly shaken. He hadn't anticipated the backlash his actions would provoke, nor did he fully understand the magnitude of his mistake. Captain Lewis finally entered the room where Marcus was seated. He carried a folder filled with papers and set it down on the table. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice strained but respectful, "I want to assure you that we are taking this matter very seriously. Officer Dawson has been suspended pending an investigation, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that justice is served." Marcus looked at him, his expression unreadable. "That's good to hear," he said quietly. "But suspending one officer isn't enough. This isn't just about him. It's about a system that allows this kind of behavior to happen in the first place." Captain Lewis nodded, though it was clear he didn't know how to respond. He opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a formal apology from the department. We're also offering compensation for your inconvenience, though I realize no amount of money can make up for what you've been through." Marcus glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up. "Money isn't the point," he said firmly. "What happened to me last night happens to countless others every day. The difference is that most of them don't have my platform or connections. They don't get apologies or investigations. They just get dismissed, ignored, or worse." The captain shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We're committed to change, Mr. Johnson. This incident has exposed flaws in our training and procedures, and we intend to address them." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. "Words are easy. Actions are what matter. If you're serious about change, start by holding people accountable. Not just Officer Dawson, but everyone who turns a blind eye to racism within your ranks. Train your officers to recognize their biases. And most importantly, listen to the communities you claim to serve. Captain Lewis nodded again, scribbling notes onto a pad of paper. We'll take your recommendations under advisement, he promised. In the meantime, is there anything else we can do for you? Marcus thought for a moment before speaking. Yes. Let me speak to the press. I want to tell my story, not just for myself, but for everyone who feels invisible because of incidents like this. If you're truly committed to transparency, let me use this moment to push for real reform. The captain hesitated, clearly uneasy about the idea of giving Marcus a platform, but after a long pause, he agreed. If that's what you want, we'll arrange it. Just please be patient with us. This is uncharted territory for all of us. By mid-morning, Marcus stepped outside the police station, flanked by Captain Lewis and a few other senior officers. A sea of reporters and cameras awaited him, their questions flying fast and furious. Protesters cheered loudly, holding up banners and chanting slogans. The scene was chaotic, yet Marcus remained composed, his presence commanding attention. He raised a hand to quiet the crowd, and slowly the noise subsided. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. Last night I experienced something that many Black Americans face regularly: discrimination at the hands of those sworn to protect us. I was detained, handcuffed, and treated as a suspect simply because of the color of my skin. It shouldn't have happened, and it cannot happen again. His words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. He continued, his voice growing stronger. While I appreciate the apologies offered today, they are not enough. Real change requires action. It requires accountability. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths and dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequality. The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every word. Cameras captured his determined expression, broadcasting it to living rooms across the nation. For many watching, Marcus's speech was a wake-up call, a reminder that racism wasn't just a relic of the past, but a present-day reality that needed addressing. Among the crowd was Emily Richards, the journalist whose video had sparked the outrage. She stood near the front, her phone recording the entire scene. As Marcus spoke, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Her decision to document the incident had given a voice to someone who might otherwise have been silenced. More importantly, it had amplified the voices of countless others who had suffered similar injustices. When Marcus finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause. Reporters shouted follow-up questions, but he held up a hand, signaling that he was done. Turning to Captain Lewis, he said quietly, "Thank you for letting me say my piece. Now it's time for you to prove that you mean what you've promised." Captain Lewis nodded solemnly, aware that the eyes of the nation were upon him. "We won't let you down, Mr. Johnson." Later that afternoon, the fallout from Marcus's arrest continued to unfold. Local politicians issued statements condemning the incident and calling for reforms within law enforcement. Secretary Alvarez, Marcus's boss, released a public statement affirming his support for Marcus and pledging to work alongside advocacy groups to combat systemic racism. Even the mayor weighed in, announcing plans to implement mandatory bias training for all city employees, including police officers. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan Dawson found himself at the center of the storm. Suspended without pay, he became a pariah both within the department and in the community. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves from him, unwilling to associate with someone whose actions had caused such widespread outrage. Dawson tried to defend himself, insisting that he had simply been doing his job, but his excuses fell on deaf ears. For Marcus, the whirlwind of attention was overwhelming. Back at home, he collapsed onto his couch, exhausted but determined. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers thanking him for speaking out. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, while others offered words of encouragement. Reading through them, Marcus realized the true impact of what had happened. His ordeal had become a catalyst for change, shining a spotlight on issues that had long been ignored. But he also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never came quickly or painlessly, especially when it involved challenging deeply ingrained prejudices. Still, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. If his experience could prevent even one person from enduring what he had gone through, it would be worth it. As the sun set once more, casting a golden glow over the city, Marcus allowed himself a moment of hope. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he believed that progress was possible. The days that followed Marcus Johnson's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. The story dominated headlines nationwide, sparking debates on television talk shows, in classrooms, and around dinner tables. People couldn't stop talking about it. For many, the incident was a stark reminder of how deeply rooted racism still was in society. For others, it served as a wake-up call, a moment to reflect on their own biases and the systems they supported. Emily Richards found herself at the center of the storm. Her video had gone viral, earning millions of views and shares across social media platforms. Journalists from major news outlets reached out to her, asking for interviews and insights into what she had witnessed. At first, Emily hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Her work usually involved writing articles from behind the scenes. But as the requests poured in, she realized this was an opportunity to amplify the message even further. Sitting in front of a camera for a live interview, Emily recounted the events of that night. "I was just driving home when I saw the police cruiser pull over a man changing a tire," she explained. "At first I thought maybe the officer was helping him, but then I noticed the tone, the way the officer spoke to him. It didn't feel right. So I started recording." Her voice grew firmer as she continued. What happened to Marcus Johnson shouldn't have happened to anyone. He was doing something completely normal, fixing a flat tire, and yet he was treated like a criminal. That's not okay. It's not fair, and it happens far too often. The interview struck a chord with viewers. Emily's calm yet passionate delivery resonated with people who had grown tired of empty promises and half-hearted apologies. Her words reinforced the urgency of the situation, reminding everyone that this wasn't just about one incident. It was about a pattern that needed to end. Meanwhile, Marcus spent his days navigating a mix of emotions. On one hand, he felt grateful for the outpouring of support. Messages flooded his inbox praising him for speaking out and standing up for justice. Strangers sent letters thanking him for giving them hope. Advocacy groups invited him to speak at rallies and conferences, eager to hear his perspective on systemic change. But on the other hand, Marcus couldn't shake the frustration and anger bubbling beneath the surface. He had spent years building a career, working tirelessly to make a difference in government policy. Yet none of that mattered the moment Officer Ryan Dawson approached him on that dark road. In an instant, all his achievements were dismissed because of the color of his skin. It was a sobering reminder of how fragile progress could be. One afternoon, Marcus met with Secretary Alvarez in Washington, D.C. The two sat in a quiet office away from the chaos of reporters and cameras. Secretary Alvarez leaned forward, his expression serious. "Marcus, I want you to know that we stand with you fully. What happened was unacceptable, and we will do everything in our power to ensure it doesn't happen again." Marcus nodded, appreciating the sentiment but knowing words alone weren't enough. "Thank you, sir. But I need more than just support. We need action. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who faces discrimination daily. If we're going to create real change, we have to tackle the root causes." Secretary Alvarez agreed, promising to push for legislation aimed at reforming law enforcement practices. He also announced plans to host a series of town hall meetings across the country, inviting community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens to share their experiences and ideas. Marcus played a key role in organizing these events, using his platform to bring attention to voices that had long been ignored. Back in the small suburban town where it all began, the police department scrambled to contain the fallout. Captain Lewis worked tirelessly to implement new policies, including mandatory bias training for all officers. He also established a citizen advisory board to provide oversight and accountability. While some praised these efforts as steps in the right direction, Others remained skeptical, arguing that cosmetic changes wouldn't fix deeper problems. Officer Ryan Dawson, meanwhile, became a pariah. Suspended without pay, he struggled to find allies willing to defend him. His colleagues avoided him, fearing guilt by association. Friends stopped returning his calls, and neighbors whispered behind his back. Dawson tried to justify his actions, insisting that he had simply been following protocol. But no one listened. In their eyes, he represented everything wrong with law enforcement, a symbol of unchecked power and prejudice. As public pressure mounted, the district attorney announced plans to file charges against Officer Dawson. The decision sent shockwaves through the police department, where many feared it would set a dangerous precedent. Some argued that holding officers accountable was necessary to rebuild trust with the community. Others worried it would discourage officers from making tough decisions in the line of duty. For Marcus, the prospect of legal consequences brought mixed feelings. On one hand, he believed accountability was essential. Without it, there was little incentive for change. On the other hand, he knew punishing one officer wouldn't solve the larger issue. True reform required a cultural shift, one that challenged stereotypes, promoted empathy, and prioritized fairness over fear. Despite the challenges, momentum for change continued to grow. Across the country, cities began reviewing their policing policies, implementing reforms such as body cameras, de-escalation training, and independent review boards. Activists organized marches and rallies, demanding justice not only for Marcus, but for countless others who had suffered similar injustices. In Neum, Marcus's hometown, a group of young activists launched a campaign called Justice Beyond Words. They held weekly meetings, brainstorming ways to keep the conversation alive and hold leaders accountable. One of their initiatives involved creating a database of police misconduct cases, making it easier for citizens to track patterns and demand action. Another focused on educating students about racial bias and its impact on society. Marcus attended several of these meetings, offering guidance and encouragement. Though he appreciated the enthusiasm of the younger generation, he reminded them that change wouldn't come overnight. "This is a marathon, not a sprint," he told them during one gathering. "We've made progress, but there's still so much work to do. Don't lose sight of the goal and don't let anyone silence your voice." His words inspired those around him, fueling their determination to keep pushing forward. For many, Marcus had become more than just a victim of racial profiling. He was a beacon of hope, proof that standing up for justice could lead to meaningful change. As weeks turned into months, the initial frenzy surrounding Marcus's arrest began to fade. Headlines shifted to other stories and protests dwindled in size, but the movement sparked by that single night on a quiet suburban road showed no signs of slowing down. Communities continued to organize, advocate, and demand better. Leaders listened, albeit reluctantly at times, recognizing that ignoring the calls for reform was no longer an option. For Marcus, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. He resumed his duties as a government advisor, though he now approached his work with renewed purpose. Every policy recommendation, every meeting, every decision carried extra weight, knowing that his voice could help shape a fairer, more equitable future. Yet even as things settled, Marcus never forgot the lessons of that night. The experience had changed him, deepening his understanding of the struggles faced by so many. It had also strengthened his resolve to fight for justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. And so, as the sun rose on another day, Marcus stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to equality was long and fraught with obstacles, but he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Together, with the support of countless others, they would continue to push forward, one step at a time. Months had passed since the night Marcus Johnson was detained by Officer Ryan Dawson. The incident that began as a single act of racial profiling had grown into something much larger, a movement, a call for change, and a moment of reckoning for communities across the country. Though the initial outrage had subsided, the ripple effects continued to spread, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. Officer Ryan Dawson's trial became a focal point for discussions about accountability within law enforcement. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and members of the public eager to witness the outcome. Dawson sat quietly at the defense table, his face pale and drawn. He looked nothing like the brash officer who had pulled over Marcus on that quiet road months earlier. Instead, he appeared defeated, aware of the weight of scrutiny bearing down on him. The prosecution argued that Dawson's actions were not just reckless, but emblematic of a broader pattern of racial bias within policing. They presented evidence from Emily Richards' video, expert testimony on implicit bias, and statements from witnesses who had seen the arrest unfold. The defense, meanwhile, tried to paint Dawson as a well-meaning officer who had made an honest mistake. But their arguments fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence showing how Dawson's behavior had crossed the line. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty of misconduct and abuse of power. The judge sentenced Dawson to probation, community service, and mandatory anti-bias training. While some felt the punishment was too lenient, others saw it as a step forward, a clear message that officers would be held accountable for discriminatory actions. For Marcus, the verdict brought a sense of closure, though he knew it wasn't the end of the fight. "This isn't about revenge," he said during a press conference following the trial. "It's about setting a precedent. If we want real change, we need to hold people accountable, not out of hatred, but out of hope for a better future." The case also prompted widespread reforms within the police department. Captain Lewis worked tirelessly to implement new policies, including stricter oversight of officer conduct, improved training programs, and greater transparency in interactions with the public. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, and footage was regularly reviewed to identify potential issues before they escalated. Community leaders praised these efforts, though they emphasized that lasting change would take time and commitment. Emily Richards, whose video had sparked the national conversation, found herself at a crossroads. Her coverage of Marcus's story had earned her recognition as a journalist, leading to offers from major news organizations. But she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to leave behind the local reporting she loved. In the end, she decided to stay in her hometown, focusing on stories that highlighted everyday struggles and triumphs within marginalized communities. "There are so many voices that need to be heard," she told a colleague. "I want to keep shining a light on them." Marcus, too, continued to use his platform to advocate for justice. He traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, meeting with lawmakers, and working alongside activists to push for systemic reforms. His speeches often centered on the idea that progress required collaboration between government officials, law enforcement, and ordinary citizens. "We're stronger together," he would say. "When we listen to each other and work toward common goals, anything is possible." One of his most impactful projects involved partnering with advocacy groups to create educational resources for schools. These materials taught students about the history of racial injustice in America and encouraged them to think critically about fairness and equality. Teachers reported that the lessons sparked meaningful conversations among students, helping them understand the importance of standing up against discrimination. In Marcus's hometown, the changes inspired by his ordeal transformed the community. The Citizen Advisory Board established by Captain Lewis gained traction, becoming a trusted forum where residents could voice concerns and offer suggestions for improving police practices. Activists launched initiatives aimed at fostering trust between law enforcement and the people they served, such as neighborhood patrols conducted jointly by officers and community members. Even Officer Dawson, humbled by his experience, sought redemption in his own way. After completing his sentence, he enrolled in social work courses, hoping to give back to the community he had once harmed. It was a slow and difficult journey, but those who knew him noticed a genuine shift in his attitude. "I messed up," he admitted during a class discussion, "but I'm trying to learn from my mistakes and do better." As the months turned into years, the memory of that fateful night remained etched in the minds of those who had lived through it. For Marcus, it served as both a reminder of the challenges he faced and a source of motivation to keep fighting for a better world. He often reflected on how far things had come since that evening on the roadside, how a single act of injustice had ignited a movement that refused to be silenced. On the anniversary of his arrest, Marcus returned to the spot where it had all begun. The road was quieter now, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. He stood there for a long time, thinking about the events that had unfolded and the countless lives they had touched. A car pulled up beside him, and Emily stepped out, holding a bouquet of flowers. "I thought you might be here," she said with a smile. "Figured you could use some company." Marcus chuckled softly. "You know me too well." They stood together in silence for a while, looking out at the empty stretch of pavement. Finally, Emily spoke. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been driving by that night?" Marcus nodded. "All the time. But I try not to dwell on it. What matters is what we've done since then, how we've used this moment to make a difference." Emily smiled again, her expression thoughtful. "Well, I think you've done pretty amazing things." "So have you," Marcus replied. "None of this would have been possible without your courage." They stayed there a little longer, sharing stories and reflecting on the journey they had taken together. As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the support he had received, but for the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the pain and hardship, people had come together to demand justice and build a brighter future. And so, as they walked away from the roadside, Marcus and Emily carried with them the knowledge that change was possible. It wouldn't always be easy, and there would still be obstacles to overcome. But as long as people refused to give up, as long as they kept speaking out and standing up for what was right, the world would continue to move closer to the vision of equality and fairness they all dreamed of.